Howdy folks, here's Arizona springtime. This will be chapter 15, Return to the Canyon. 5 years after meeting, Audrey and I returned to the Grand Canyon for our anniversary celebration. We booked the trip with Gray Line bus tours over the same time of year as our previous trip. We knew volatile weather and snow could be in the forecast, but we believed we could outsmart Mother Nature by taking a bus trip. Little did we know the bus trip would be its own adventure. Since we were both working full-time, we chose a trip that would be limited to a single weekend. We were living in an apartment in Scottsdale and reasoned that since we didn't need to drive, it would be an easy trip. We packed light for an overnight trip. On the morning of embarkation, we drove to an area of downtown Phoenix and parked inside the depot lot. We were the first to board, and after securing a couple of seats near the driver, he introduced himself as Lucky. We would need that. The bus departed on time and made the rounds to a few of the Scottsdale resorts. The bus filled with out-of-state tourists, and Lucky began the drive north along the interstate. Almost immediately, clouds began to fill the sky. We arrived in Sedona, a beautiful, sparsely populated village at the time, surrounded by impressive red rock formations. The weather kept deteriorating, but we grabbed large slices of pizza from an out-of-the-way but still convenient pizza joint. We sat outside on metal chairs under a metal umbrella. Then snow flurries began to fall innocently enough. After the quick lunch, we joined the other tourists and piled back into the bus. Lucky had parked the bus directly in front of the famous Oak Creek Tavern. I knew the story behind the tavern. It was a famous local spot because the founders of the Cowboy Artists of America had met there decades before to form the Association of Western Artists. Unceremoniously, we departed for the true destination. The bus climbed in elevation, and the snow flurries thickened the farther we traveled from Sedona. The bus arrived at the entrance of the Grand Canyon National Park. Lucky drove immediately to Grand View Point. Normally, the point overlooking the canyon lived up to its name, but as we exited the bus, we only saw nothing, absolutely nothing of the canyon. A dense fog blanketed the entire canyon just under the rim. We could only observe snow on the ground and the thick cloud layer covering the canyon rim to rim. The out-of-town tourists who had traveled from far away to see the spectacular canyon had no desire to linger. So Lucky, not so far, drove back to the resort area, and we all checked in at Maswick Lodge. Audrey and I gave up any thought of walking over to El Tovar Hotel for a gourmet dinner as part of our celebration. Piled high continued to fall. Walking was difficult. The entire parking lot and sidewalks were skating rinks. Darkness and swirling snow made a trek anywhere too risky. We were more prepared than last time in case it was cold. We had leather jackets and warm clothing. Lucky and many of the Scottsdale tourists did not. We quickly unpacked and left the modest room to the hotel's spacious log cabin themed restaurant. We could observe there was little food left to choose from, and the limited staff appeared overworked. We knew at that point that we had arrived during a major snowstorm. We ordered chili with a large order of French fries to load us up with carbs, fat, and protein in hopes of reducing the penetrating chill. For dessert, nothing was left in the restaurant. The hotel store, though, had Pepperidge Farm cookies, so we bought those and went back to the room. We looked outside the window, and a foot of snow balanced on the protected railing. Behind the railing, there were only dim outlines of tall, snow-covered pines. We had brought a coffee maker because hotels, resorts, or motels with restaurants would often skip the amenity. We did not need to worry about the simple luxury. We checked the TV listings. There was not much on in those days before satellite, but we found the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid ready to start. We watched the movie and every once in a while checked on the snow as it continued to fall. We went to sleep in a nice comfortable bed that was vastly superior to sleeping out in 15-degree weather like we did 5 years before. The next morning we looked out the window as we breakfasted on donuts we had somehow packed and finished those off with hot coffee. The view was of a deep blue sky peeking between pines amid a wonderland of snow. We could not linger because there was an early bus departure. After checkout, we joined everyone on the bus for a return drive to the rim. Would it be fogged in? No. The winter storm was moving east. Snow was still falling from the thick and vicious edge of clouds that hung low on the eastern portions of the canyon. Closer to the rim, the sky was clear and bright. The early morning sun warmed the humid chill surrounding us. A busload of elderly Japanese tourists arrived and parked near our bus. Many elderly women gingerly left their bus. They wore traditional kimonos, wooden gaita sandals, and tabi socks. All the women were bent over from the effects of osteoporosis. I hope that the scenery was as transformative for them and the Scottsdale tourists as it was for us. The storm had left a stark beauty and different landscape than we had seen 5 years ago. The cheerful sunshine contrasted with the storm still raging in the distant horizon. On the rim, branches of twisted, stunted trees were covered in snow. The scene was spectacular. I believe such sights can only be equal and not surpassed. Although the canyon offers spectacular scenes every moment, this scene was unusual. It was a moment at the canyon that rimside jaded residents may take for granted. I hope not. I did not know if the other tourists could appreciate the scene and the encounter with nature as ever memorable. I can recall the time decades later and return to it often. It was a contemplative and meditative experience that I am glad I was witness to. We all had to return to Phoenix. We knew it, and Lucky knew it. But there was a problem. The interstate south of Flagstaff, our route home, was closed due to the roadway covered in snow. Lucky devised a plan. He would bypass that road and instead would drive the bus south on Highway 64 directly to the historic Route 66 town of Williams. We would have lunch at the historic Rod's Steakhouse. We loaded the bus and left the canyon. Along the alternate route, the road was icy and snow-packed. We stopped at the steakhouse and enjoyed the change of pace. After lunch, there was a short jaunt along Interstate 40 to State Route 89, a two-lane highway that wound through places such as Big Black Mesa and Little Black Mesa. There were a few mountain peaks, including the Matterhorn, Dead Man Knoll, Sawtooth Peak, and we passed a road named Hell Canyon. We went through the pleasant and then little populated Chino Valley and through the historic former capital of Arizona, Prescott. Lucky wound his way past small ghost towns and entered the interstate at Cortez Junction. The rest of the trip was uneventful, and that was a welcome change. We had plenty of adventure for one trip. It would be another 15 years before we returned to the canyon to celebrate our 20th anniversary of our meeting, flew to Las Vegas. For this trip, there was no car and no bus. Instead, we would take a short flight from Las Vegas to the Grand Canyon Airport at Tusayan. Instead of arriving about April 1st, like the past trips, we chose to arrive at the canyon during the last week of April. The weather was perfect. We stayed at Caesar's Palace, and from there we took an early morning shuttle to North Las Vegas Airport. At check-in at the Air Vegas terminal, everyone was waiting, holding their luggage. Our fellow passengers were 8 Japanese tourists who were going on a half-day round-trip flight. We chose seats up front just behind the pilots. In the rear of the 10-seat plane, our luggage was stowed unceremoniously. It was only a 1-hour flight, and after takeoff, the plane flew low. Through the thick plexiglass windows, we could see the long winding rim of the canyon. The barren landscape had little sign that humans had altered it. After arriving at Tusayan, we entered the terminal, and the Air Vegas staff dispatched a Fred Harvey transportation taxi. For $10, the taxi would take us to El Tovar Hotel. In addition, we also paid entrance to the park. We checked in at El Tovar, but the room wasn't ready. We stopped at Maswick Lodge for lunch in the large cafeteria we had enjoyed 10 years before. I think that's more like 15. Anyways, where am I? Then we joined other tourists on the Blue Loop bus, which wound through the hotels and information center, and then picked up the Red Loop bus to Hermit's Rest, the western terminal point for South Rim shuttles. At the terminal, we remained on the bus. Two elderly gentlemen carrying backpacks joined us, and the shuttle filled. The hikers were friendly and talkative. They reported they had hiked the canyon countless times. The pair revealed they had just completed a week-long hike into the remote parts of the canyon. One of the men was age 72 and the other was age 77. The eldest called himself Maverick. His real name was Laurent Gaudreau. He lived for many years at the canyon in a mobile home and was a fixture at the canyon until his unfortunate, tragic death in 2009. During the next shuttle stop, people exited and others entered the shuttle. The shuttle remained in place, and after a while, the driver advised that the shuttle had broken down. We left the shuttle, and with all the other passengers, we had to wait, then scramble onto other arriving shuttles. We returned to El Tovar about 3:30 and checked into the second floor Mary Colter Suite. The suite had a refrigerator and oversized beds, two televisions, one in the bedroom, one in the living room, and room service was available. Slightly rustic in appearance, the room was experiential at the intersection of history and contemporary. After settling in, we walked to the French doors leading to a large wooden deck. The temperature was a pleasant 60 degrees, but I still wore a leather jacket and jeans, as well as a souvenir cap of a Las Vegas art show at the Bellagio featuring Alexander Calder sculptures. Audrey sported a biker-style jacket, black felt hat with a t-shirt and leggings. The panorama of the canyon from the second floor deck offered an unparalleled view. In 1984, we had little time to spend admiring views from the rim. In 1989, we had only minutes to observe the spectacular snow-covered scenery before our return trip to Phoenix. This time, we sat out on the deck and enjoyed a canyon day, complete with changing color palette of colors and shadows shifting over time. Condors appeared suddenly from below the rim to float vulture-like on the thermals, then sink and disappear. The elegant California condors were historically abundant at the canyon. They had been widespread in the West, but the birds suffered near irreversible decline, and the few remaining wild birds were captured. After the success of the captive breeding program, condors were released at the canyon. There is no mistaking them for any other American bird, for they all wear radio collars. Like vultures, the condors have an easygoing nature as they ride the rising warm air masses from the lower parts of the canyon. They appear to defy gravity. The release of condors at the canyon gave an opportunity for educating current and new generations in appreciation for the large, patient birds. Later in the day, as the canyon began to color in a palette of reds, we decided to get ready to dine. Audrey had called the El Tovar restaurant 2 weeks ahead for a dinner reservation at 5:30 p.m. We sat near the windows that overlooked the canyon and spent the next 2 hours enjoying an unrushed dinner. I ordered a half duck, and Audrey decided on a large, thick New York sirloin. Back at the suite, we invested hours of watching a long and glorious dusk transform into darkness. The canyon became so subdued that its color palette was replaced with black and dark grays lit by countless starlight. The next day we walked along the rim and watched the comings and goings of the condors. A few other people stood to watch the large birds. The smaller black shapes of ravens glided and wove along sheer canyon walls. Their distinctive calls echoed repeatedly. We walked to the cliffside Kolb studio to view an art show featuring Grand Canyon art. The art was only rivaled by the views from the panoramic windows hanging over empty space. We continued our rim walk and passed by Bright Angel Trailhead. A family stood there at the brink. Their child explained, "I'd never go in there. It's full of wildlife." An interesting comment. We sauntered over to the famous family-run Verkamp store. Audrey bought a gift for me. She gave me a Native American carved jet with turquoise eyes raven fetish. To this day I keep the reminder of our trip with me everywhere I go. For dinner, Audrey had sirloin and I had beef tenderloin, and they were both fantastic. We grabbed a couple of drinks at the bar, took them upstairs, and went out onto the deck. During the trip to the canyon in 1984, Audrey had borrowed one of my shirts. After our hike, she thoughtfully washed it and returned it to me. She tucked a package of incense sticks in the front shirt pocket. I brought the same box of incense with me for our anniversary. We burned one of those incense sticks in honor of the occasion. The next morning, I walked along the rim and went to an area where Sunday worship services are held. The previous day, a clerk at Kolb Studios had noticed I was wearing a t-shirt with illustrations of ancient trilobite fossils. He told me about fossils that could be seen in the surface of ancient rocks near a cliff edge just 50 feet from the worship spot. Could that really be? Yes, the ancient marine fossils were there all right. They were scattered, and groups of well-formed fossils were exposed on rock faces to the edge of a sheer canyon wall. At 10:45 we checked out, and the concierge called for a taxi to the airport, where we arrived 45 minutes later. Our flight back to Vegas was uneventful, and after being dropped off at Caesar Palace, we took a bus to the airport and flew home. The ephemeral nature of the canyon, that is, to be a witness to its changes moment by moment, can be significant for an individual. It was for me. If all my life was reduced to just a memory of those spring trips to the canyon, I would know I had lived well. So ends the chapter. Next will be a portfolio of photographs.